I am so excited to hear more about your story and about your brand, and hopefully somebody hears this and they feel inspired.
Thank you.
So tell me, how far along are you in your journey of entrepreneurship?
Oh, I would say I'm in diapers. I
Okay.
started, yes, I feel like I am in kilometer 1 of a marathon. And I started pretty much with no experience in the CPG, consumer packaged goods industry, no business experience, just with an idea and with a lot of dedication and passion about what I was doing for the Latino culture. And that's where I am. I'm 4 years into the business. I started the business because I wanted to elevate Mexican cultura and the community in the US through better for you snacks with sombrero-free branding, after having the experience of seeing a lot of established brands in US stores that were showcasing our cultura in a very stereotypical way. So a lot of sombreros, indigenous women cooking on the front of the packaging, and then also seeing nopales, which is a prickly pear cactus, a staple crop in Mexico, one of the most sustainable plants because it thrives in hot weather. It doesn't need mud water to survive. It doesn't need pesticides. And I got so excited when I saw the plant, and I thought, I'm going to make the ensalada de nopales that I used to eat when I was young, tacos de nopales, all these different things. And then I was about to grab the nopal paddle, and it had spikes. And I thought, nobody's going to buy a vegetable with spikes. It looks intimidating. It hurts your hand the moment that you grab it. If you don't know how to cook it, how to clean it, why would you get this vegetable? And there's really not a ton of education. I mean, this was 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But at the time, there needs to be more now. But at the time, there was even less education around nopales. So those were the two moments that sparked the idea of starting a food business. And at the time, I didn't start the food business because I just kept on working on my legal career. I did immigration law at the time and human rights. And I didn't feel or didn't think that I was capable of starting a business at the time. I thought, I do not have the background that I see you need on paper to start a business. I didn't even do corporate law in school. I mean, I did in Mexico, but not in the US. So
Yeah.
I didn't feel capable. And I was so afraid of all the things that I didn't know. And then later on, I just thought, you start things exactly where you are. You start with fear. You start with a lot of doubt, with a lot of uncertainty of what you're doing, of how you're going to do it, of how you're going to grow. But that's exactly how you start. So I just started with that DIY packaging, DIY website, packaging that looks very different from what you see right now. I knew that I had an imperfect product. I knew that I had an imperfect branding. And I wanted to learn, and I wanted data from the consumer, from who I thought was a consumer at the time also. So that's pretty much how I started.
Yeah. And I think, entrepreneurship means like, I'll figure it out. You're just going to figure out what the answers are. If you don't know what the answers are, you're going to somehow find a way, find someone or online or some books or something and just kind of roll with it, because that's kind of what we have to do. There's no textbook that says here's the direct way to become an entrepreneur. There's different guides and everything, but it's so different for everybody. And depending what field you go into. So when I was reading your biography, or what you sent me of, you grew up in Mexico City.
I did.
Right? Okay. So you're in Mexico City. When did you decide in Mexico City, okay, I'm going to go to the US and I'm starting this brand? Or how did coming to the US happen?
No, not at all. I grew up in Mexico City. I was born in Delaware, but my family, we moved back to Mexico City. My parents are Mexican because that's where home is and family. And my parents were just here for school. And I grew up in Mexico City, and I moved here 12 years ago to Chicago. And I originally moved here to go to law school. And I thought, if I find a job as a lawyer, I'll stay. Like, I didn't even envision staying with a job that wasn't law related. So I thought, if I find a job, I'll stay. I have the US citizenship. So the fact that businesses don't have to sponsor me to stay. Maybe that's helpful. If I don't find a job doing some sort of law related thing, I'll go back to Mexico. And because I was going into the nonprofit sector, human rights, I wasn't really going into corporate law. It was a little bit more difficult to create that network in Chicago and in the US, because a lot of people that come to do, we call it, it's an LLM, it's a master in laws. A lot of them go to corporate law. And there's an understanding that there's some corporate laws or law firms that are going to hire as temporary attorneys, international attorneys. So I was kind of out of that space. So it took me some time. And then it was almost graduation and I didn't have a job. And I was like, I'm just going to have to go back. At the time, I also met who's now my husband. We had a class together in law school. And I told him, this is great. You're amazing. I love you, but I'm not going to stay without a job. If I don't have a job, I'm not going to stay for you. So just FYI, I have, a timeline of 4 months for me to find a job. And if I don't, see you in Mexico, no? So I ended up finding a job, and that's when I started doing immigration law here. And still at the time, I was still very focused on immigration law. I've never done immigration law, and I loved doing it, and I loved connecting with Latino and Latinas and families that were mostly from Latin America and Mexico. And at the time I thought, I want to stay in Chicago as long as I stay somehow connected with culture, with community, and immigration law was a perfect segue for that. I worked with unaccompanied minors and adults. So I loved doing that. And you said something that's interesting when you asked me this question, because you said it's different. Entrepreneurship is different for everyone. And that's something that has taken me some time to understand. Because even when I started the business, even though I knew I was coming in with a brand that was different from other brands, with a different mission compared to others, with a product that was also different, a different ingredient, etc., I still thought, and again, because I didn't have a lot of background in the CPG space or business, that there was just one way of conducting business. There was just one way of doing things. This is a playbook. This is how you do it. And this is how to succeed. And it took me some time to understand and see that there's no one way of conducting business, that there's a lot of different ways. You choose your path according to how fast do you want to grow, how do you want to grow, what's the funding that you have available. If you don't have funding available, how are you going to make that happen? So it took a lot of questions, a lot of them honest questions, and asking around and getting to understand how the system works in retail, in direct to consumer, etc., to really understand and find the path for Nemi Snacks. And 4 years in, the company's still bootstrapped. We don't have outside investment. We received a lot of grants and a lot of mentorship and support to take us to where we are today. And a lot of that has been a response from our consumers, a directly response from our consumers, and having good margins. I always say I didn't know anything, but the one thing that I did know was that I needed to have good margins, and that has taken us a long way.
Yeah, that's good to know. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes it doesn't, we go into it thinking just that, okay, it has to be this way, but in reality, it's
right.
not. You don't know what's going to happen in your path of, becoming an entrepreneur, or starting a small business. It's life, first of all, happens. And then you don't know about the funding. A lot of people don't think about the funding. It's kind of like one of the last things that people think about sometimes, especially if you don't have a business background. Now, going from law to having Nemi Snacks, that's completely on the other side of the spectrum. How did that happen? How did you decide, okay, I want to make this snack?
Yes, and I think in a way it is on the other side of the spectrum, but because of the work that I was doing, I think also it's not on the other side of the spectrum, and I'll tell you why. So when I was doing immigration law, a lot of the clients that I worked with were farmers that were forced to leave their home countries as a result of predatory farming practices against what they were doing. And very similar stories of everything that I did and every time that we harvested, and it was just pure love, and it was a household over family. And then working with certain vendors that were kept squeezing and squeezing and squeezing our pricing. They had to change their manufacturing practices. They had to pivot from maybe not using any pesticides to using pesticides because they couldn't afford a loss because of the price that they were selling at. So a lot of these stories resonated with me. A lot of clients that were survivors of domestic violence, and these stories of, I thought I was capable, I felt capable, until somebody kept telling me that I wasn't, until somebody kept telling me that I was stupid, that I was worthless. And you end up believing what you tell yourself or what you let people in and what you hear from a lot of people. And at the time, I didn't have a product, but I thought there's something about the way we're doing business that if it's not helping the community. And yes, it is about providing jobs, and it is about supporting in a way through the provision of jobs to your community. But there was some missing elements to me, and it was about how can I uplift the community, and how can I, in a way and in a small scale, still create the change that I want to see that I'm not seeing in this space. So at the beginning, I thought I want to work directly with farmers. I want to be intentional about working with women of color as much as I can. And this was an idea and a vision of the company, but I didn't know exactly how I was going to do that. And with law, I thought, this human rights work that I'm doing, how can I combine this as much as we can? Because in the end, Nemi Snacks, it's a for-profit business, but how can we include all these elements into the business? And I think also having the legal background for reading contracts, for understanding regulations, that is still very helpful. And that kind of got me through everything that goes into importing the product, going through FDA inspections, reading FDA regulations, everything that falls under compliance. That was very helpful because I wasn't intimidated by going through all the regulations, by negotiating with vendors, by reading contracts. So in that way, I think it was very helpful. And in the end, it was that experience that sparked the possibility of starting a business in the food industry.
Got it. But at that time, you still hadn't developed what it was going to be, but you knew behind it what was the purpose of it, right?
Yes.
You knew what
so
you wanted in the company.
I knew what the mission was. I knew how I wanted to do it. I didn't have a product at that moment. And I kept my full-time job. I thought, when I thought about the product, I thought, okay, in the snacks, and I'm not finding something that's crunchy, made with real ingredients, that's Latino inspired, that delivers on flavor and crunch, that as consumers, we're not going to sacrifice health for something that doesn't have the texture we're expecting if we want a crunchy snack, or doesn't have the flavor that we're expecting in a snack. So I wanted to get those three elements in the product. And I went to Mexico and I started kind of going through a repertoire of possibilities and flavors, and really asking my mom, I really like your salsa de chipotle, but how can I create this? I really like your chiles en vinagres. How can I create this? So how can I transfer all these recipes, family recipes from that were just made at home into something that is good and fun to eat? And how can I change nopales from being a slimy vegetable that it's not easy to maybe understand, or maybe the first time you try it, maybe you won't necessarily like it because it's slimy, it's a little bit bitter, but how can I share this amazing ingredient that also has a cultural significance to Mexico because it's in our Mexican flag and it represents resilience? How can I use this and share it in a fun, snackable way? And that's how it started. I thought about tortilla chips, but I was like, I don't have any outside funding. The tortilla chip market it's saturated, but it's also saturated by big brands. I don't know if I can compete that way. I thought about a puff. I thought about different things. And then within the puff category, I thought about the veggie stick. And it's kind of a veggie stick, but it's sturdy, it's crunchier. It has a highly, a significantly higher nutritional profile than the average puff or crunchy snack. Nemi Snacks have 6 grams of protein per serving, and it's 1 serving per bag, 4 grams of fiber per bag. We don't use any artificial ingredients. So kind of getting everything into, just want to keep it real, use real ingredients, and really being transparent about the consumer is eating and where this is coming from. And that's how it all started. Again, in a very small scale, with limited funding, not understanding a lot of the logistics of the space, but I knew that I was just going to, yay, you have the churro. Yes.
I'm gonna try it. But so a lot of people don't know even like nopales, like the cactus.
Yeah.
That's what it looks like. So a lot of people don't even know that in the US, but it is a staple in Mexican culture, right? So you were mentioning about how it's in the flag, it represents resilience. So I think you chose a really great, symbol, even just for
thank you
the brand itself. I love nopales. It's hard to get nopales really here in Chicago, at least for me. Like when I lived in New York, it's a lot easier.
Yes.
I could get tacos de nopales or ensalada de nopales pretty easy. But for some reason here, I feel like it's very underrated. And from what I know about it, also it's pretty nutritious.
Yes.
Yeah. So
yes, it is underrated. I think we're moving towards getting to know more and use more all these ingredients that are highly sustainable. And nopales, it's one of them because of the properties that they have to retain moisture and water, and how they need very little water to survive and thrive. And you can see nopales in backyards on the side of the road. You find them in Arizona, in Southern California, in Texas. And it's been interesting to see how the consumers around there, they know nopales, so they're more familiar. So I have a lot of my sales are going to Texas, Southern California, Arizona, New Mexico, that area, because people see nopales in their backyards and see nopales when they're walking on the street, and they're more familiar to not only the plant itself, but to its properties. And I really hope that other brands use more nopales or more plants that are in the cacti family, because they're packed with antioxidants, they have fiber, depending on how you use them. So if I were to eat the paddle, boil it, or just slice it and eat it, that has a ton of moisture. We have to get rid of the moisture to make the snack. Even, we even use it for hangovers in Mexico because of the moisture content. In Mexico, there's also, it's powdered and it's used for it regulates blood sugar. I don't usually market that way or advertise it that way, because that's kind of a little bit foreign to what we do, and those could be muddy waters as well, the claims part. But it has a big fiber content, which is mostly used the way that you see it in CPG. That's what it's used for.
And now you're in your 4th year, right?
Yes.
So
and I just left my full-time job.
Okay, so now you've left your full-time job. So what made you feel like, okay, now I can leave my full-time job? So I think
a lot of different
taking
things.
that leap is usually one of the hardest things also for entrepreneurs.
Yes. Last year, so 2023, I thought it was the first time where I thought, I really think I need to work on a timeline. Like I should have done that at the beginning, and I didn't, because I was just doing so many things with the business, and I had the full-time and a personal life. So I was like, I'll know when it's time to take that leap. I'll know when it's time to jump. But at the beginning, I didn't really have a plan to say, when I hit this number in sales, or the moment this happens, I'm going to take the leap. I thought, I'm going to feel it. I'm going to know. And I started feeling it. And I think I was one of the reasons was close to burnout. And then having just conversations with my husband also about our finances and our future and everything that goes into having the conversation of where were we both comfortable of me taking the leap, and what did that mean. And then earlier this year, I started seeing and feeling how a lot of opportunities were just going down the drain. How do you say it? Like, there, what's the expression of like slipping through my fingers?
Oh, okay. I thought you were saying like rising up.
No, the other way around.
Okay.
Of like just seeing them go and thinking, I know that if I had the time, I could do it. I would say yes. And I had already tried, you know, in this in between space, I said yes to as much as I could with what I had, knowing that yes, you know, feeling confident about those yeses. And even if for the ones that where I was a bit not confident enough that I was going to figure it out and deliver. But there were some earlier this year that it was like, you know, that does pain me, because if I were full time and if I was fully dedicated to it, and if I had this mental space where I could commit to that, I would be able to do it. So that was one thing. Another thing was I started feeling exhausted. I started feeling like it wasn't only about the time factor of if I had 10 more hours, or but it was also about the mental space. And I was divided, totally divided into, it's not only about the time, but it's also about the energy and the mental space that I'm putting it. And then I also realized that because I didn't have time for everything, because I didn't have this, because I wasn't fully committed, I was in a way operating from a mindset of scarcity. And I probably was going to continue operating that way unless I made a decision. So those were mainly the three things that triggered me saying, I'm never going to be 100% sure. I'm never going to be 100% accurate. And I don't want to, because in the end, that's kind of a waste too. So I'm just going to do it. And I'm just going to take the risk. And I have no regrets about that change.
Yeah. Well, congratulations. It's a big step.
Thank you.
Yeah. And the opportunities are going to keep coming, you know, now that you're in it full time and everything. And so you mentioned,
I agree.
Yeah. And you mentioned that you met your partner while you were in law school.
Yes.
So you're both lawyers, right?
Yes.
And then so I think this is an important topic to touch on, is also relationships, not only, you know, friends, but also romantic ones, because a lot of times when you're an entrepreneur, you need someone to lean on, you know,
100%.
and it is a lonely road, or it can be, you know,
it is.
It makes a difference whether or not you have a supportive partner.
Yes.
Now you're both lawyers, and then you decide, you know, okay, I'm going to make Nemi Snacks. What does your partner say, or how did you even start saying this to your partner? And at the time, were you two already married?
At the time the idea existed before we got married. When I launched, we were already married. But the conversation started earlier. And I really appreciate being with a partner and in a position where not only my partner, but the support network, family, close friends of some, you know, I never received, you can't do that, or it's not going to work because you didn't go to business school, or it's not going to work because you don't have a food chemistry background or a branding background. And I wasn't unaware of the learning curve in pretty much everything. But nobody ever told me you can't do it. Like even my husband, so I'm physically petite. And he would always say, you know, you can do and be anything you want except a basketball player because of your height. So just having that support system. And again, you know, it's a lot of it is what we constantly tell ourselves, what our environment and what we're constantly hearing and seeing. And I think considering everything socially and just all the social constructions around gender and our belief system, and because I grew up in a country that is relatively, you know, it's conservative in a lot of different ways, that a lot of gender norms are very, you know, still happening on a daily basis. And there were a lot of limitations that came from that. So it took also a lot of inner work into saying, you know, I'm not determined by that. And my self-worth is not determined or valued by that. And more of the space of being, del ser, versus deber ser, versus what's right to do, what's considered okay. So I'm just grateful that I was in a support system, and a big part of that what came from my partner, of really uplifting me and really saying you can do anything you want. And you know, we're a household of two. We don't have children by choice, but also there's no expectation, you know, because of I should be the breadwinner, he should be the breadwinner, or it's a partnership. And it's a constant conversation about how that partnership looks. And there's moments where I'm working all day because if there's a grant that is due, or a PO that we have to deliver on, or something happened at the warehouse, or something I have to figure out, that I have that open communication of saying, I can't do this. Can you chime in on this? Or I know we talked about a simple example. I know I said I was going to cook tonight, but I actually change of plans. Would you mind taking over tonight? So it's always kind of that open conversation that you build, right? It's not something that just happens. You build towards that. And also with my family, even though they're not in here, but just having that support system, creating a support system from other founders in the industry, everyone, you know, you included, Wendy. You're like, when we first talked about the Logan's Fest market that you organized and everything, but it's those experiences that make the road feel significantly less lonely. It is lonely. That's the reality, especially as a solo founder. It is lonely. And the ups and downs are part of the journey, and it's a natural development of how entrepreneurship works. But in those ups and downs, I think it's important for us to know and decide and act upon what kind of support system do we need, considering our personalities, our strengths and weaknesses, quote unquote, but what is it that we need so that we can make it through and thrive? Not only, you know, like just live through that, but really thrive, make it in a way that you feel good about it, that you are happy about it. And then in the end, you can go to bed and say, I'm so happy about what I'm doing. And if this is my last day on earth, thank you so much.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm really glad you said that, and thrive and be happy, because we get stuck in these cycles where we're just making it through the day, you know?
See.
And that's not necessarily healthy. So
no, that turns into burnout.
Yeah.
And how do you say insatisfaction, unsatisfaction? What is it? What's the word? Dissatisfaction.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
English is also my second language, and I say a lot of things incorrectly, even though I had to take English as a second language for a very long time when I was a kid, but I still use things the wrong way. So I'm not the best.
That makes two of us, so it's perfect. I feel right at home.
Yeah. So now, how did you get to your final? I think this is important to touch on, is how did you get to the final product? Is this the final look? Is there ever a final look when it comes to packaging?
I don't think there's ever a final look. There's always things that we change with every run, like packaging run. There's always a little word that we tweak, an image that we make bigger or smaller, a word that we change. And it's a constant, right? I don't think there's anything static about having a business or about entrepreneurship, because that's just not the nature of it. Not only talking about emotions and the up and downs, but just the evolution of the branding of your company. So at the beginning, my packaging was totally different. Branding was inconsistent. And I knew that. I thought, I'm just going to start. I want to get data from our consumers. So I started going to stores, getting feedback from buyers, getting feedback from consumers, active feedback, like reaching out to them. I started an email newsletter. I was doing all the demos. I really wanted to get that experience and information of, from this packaging, what do you see? What do you care about? Why are you buying this? Do you care about the ingredients? Do you care about A, B, and C? Out of all these three options, which one do you like best? So being very intentional about the questions that I was asking and the information that I wanted to get for when the rebrand came. The rebrand came a year after I launched. So we relaunched, well, not relaunched, but we launched the rebrand in mid 2021. Okay. And it took 9 months to do. And I talked to a lot of designers, and I ended up working with a team of 2 Mexican female designers that are based in Mexico City that really got an understanding of the idea and the mission and the vision of the business. So it took us some time to get there. I also worked with a copyright. Her name is Julie. She was amazing because I'm a non-native speaker. I wanted someone to help me with some things about language. I had the words. We speak Spanglish and Nemi, and that kind of flows through all our communication channels. But there were some things about the flow of the language that I felt like it could need help. So we brought in an expert in copyright, and she was amazing. And what you see, that's a packaging that we've had since 2021. The tweaks that we do we're not going to change the nopal. Probably there are some branding elements that are still there, and I think will stay, but there's just little things here and there that we tweak according to feedback that we get from consumers, right? Like, so if somebody tells us, I love that it's, and I'm giving you an example, no, not necessarily real, but if we get a lot of feedback saying, I love that it's 4 grams of fiber. I love the fiber. So it's like, well, maybe we make that bigger, right? If consumers are gravitating towards that element of the packaging.
Right.
Or maybe.
Yeah, I see it on the top there.
Right. So if they're resonating with elevating Mexican cultura, or if they're resonating with, I actually care more about making a better for you product. Well, so we kind of pivot, and we're very open to that pivoting, and we're very comfortable with change.
And I think that's important, right? To grow as a business, you have to.
Yes,
you have
I think so.
Yeah. What advice would you give someone who wants to start their company and they want to come out with a product? Maybe they don't know what kind of product they want to come out with yet. But what is the one thing that you would recommend where they should start?
Start. Exactly. Just start anywhere you are, exactly where you are. Just start with something. That decision-making process and the starting point towards the steps, it's a huge ladder. So you're not going to start one day and then the next day, maybe you're going to have a product, the branding, the ethos, the mission, everything lined up. But every step that you're taking from that starting point, it's going to take you there. So start by asking questions. If it's in the food industry that you want to start, research any local incubators. There's an amazing one here in Chicago called The Hatchery that supports businesses in the food and beverage industry with literally how to start a food business 101. So awesome. Research what's out there. If there's any brands that you look up to that you think they've done an amazing job, send them an email, reach out to them, send them a DM. A lot of them will respond, and just trying to get help. And I think that help from day one is really what's going to take you there, because even though you may be a solo founder, you're not doing anything by yourself, no? So getting into that support system since the beginning, asking a lot of questions, trying to get access to consumer reports through your local libraries, through some universities or colleges that give access to some consumer reports. So, and then one question leads you to another. And then you go back and say, oh my God, that first question that I did was not the right question. It doesn't matter. It was that first question that took you to your question number 10 that was the question that opened the gate, no? Or what led to that information that really helped you take the leap or whatever. But just start wherever you are and ask for help. And you don't have to know anything, and you don't need to have a perfect product. It will never be perfect. I still find a lot of things, like even today, if I open a bag and I try and like, maybe the crunch here, or maybe the seasoning here, that's always going to happen. And it's always a work in progress.
Right. Yeah. And that's okay. It's supposed to be that.
That's okay. That is just the way that it is. Yes.
Yeah. I think you've given some really great advice, and it was amazing to hear more about Nemi Snacks. Thank you so much for your time. Our time is almost up. So,
yes.
Is there anything else that you'd like to leave us with? Could be about
Wendy,
the brand or anything.
I just want to thank you and commend you for what you're doing for the community in Chicago, for a lot of emerging brands and small businesses. Thank you for sharing your space with us to help us amplify our brands to get into the ears of more people, of more potential consumers. My dream is just to really showcase this amazing, modern, vibrant, and colorful Mexican culture that I know and that I grew up in, and really go against or push back against the stereotype that if something is ethnic or Latino, then it has to be cheap, or it's cheap or low quality.
Yeah.
So thank you, because I really appreciate having this space to share our mission.
Well, thank you. I appreciate your words, and I appreciate hearing from founders like you.